And welcome back. Now, our first guest is the Minister of Commerce, Industry and Tourism from Bahrain, an office he has held indeed since 2014. And prior to that appointment, His Excellency spent 25 years in the private sector with his family business. And he's also served on the board of leading companies and organizations in Bahrain over the years, and indeed he still does that. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome His Highness, His Excellency, please forgive me, His Excellency Zayed Alzayani. Your Excellency, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join you this morning. I'm glad to be here and I look forward to our dialogue.
Now, I know, as you know, we all know so much is going on in the world, and indeed so much has changed really in the last 2 years. And I think we've all learned we need to be more flexible, and perhaps we need a more agile economic model really to enhance sustainable growth. What would you say, and what do you think are the best measures that business could really adopt to get a bit more agility and really look towards sustainability and success for everybody?
I think COVID has brought up a new reality upon us. And today we live in certainly a very uncertain world. The uncertainty is not due to the business mechanism, but the overcast of COVID. Nobody really can gauge or can tell when this pandemic will be over, when will we be able to go back to pre-COVID lifestyle, or if there is such a thing as pre-COVID lifestyle, we'll probably have to change our lifestyle or adopt it to the new normal, as they say. But generally speaking, I think those who have been inflicted most in COVID, of course, everybody's been hit in a way or another, but those who have been inflicted most, and the lessons we learned from COVID is when you start a business, build it on strong fundamentals. And if you have an existing business, look for those strengths and those fundamentals in your businesses and reinforce them, and try to get rid of your weaknesses. For me, I think one of the most important things people neglected in the past is scrutinizing their financial strength and continuously looking at their balance sheet. They start a business in good anticipation and good hope. With a certain capital, the business grows, or maybe not, it goes the other way. Some pour in personal funds, some end up borrowing, and they lose sight of their capacity to borrow and their capacity to repay their borrowings. And usually people are more interested to borrow, when I think the problem with borrowing is that you have to think that you have to settle it someday. And not the ease. For me, I've always, as a businessman, as a minister, as a current board member in many companies, my concern was never how to raise funding. My concern was how to meet your obligations. So this pandemic has definitely showed us that companies that overborrowed, that were over-leveraged, were the first to suffer, because they lost their source of revenue and they didn't have enough liquidity to continue meeting their financial obligations. Of course, there was attempts from the banks and governments to extend loans, to reschedule loans, but the more this pandemic prolongs, the more difficult and challenging that becomes. So that's one, debt. The second thing is to look at your cost structure. Very often people get carried away, especially in a startup, and they want to do the best in terms of spending on the business, promoting the business, building the business, but they lose sight of whether they can afford it or not. The euphoria takes over from reality. So we have to keep a close check on our spending and to see that we can afford actually to maintain that whatever cost base we have. Very often also, and especially maybe in this part of the world, businesses are heavily reliant on subsidies in one form or the other, whether it is government or non-government. And I think subsidies are a double-edged sword, because you cannot afford to build a business case study with subsidies implanted in it. Subsidies should be a bonus, an icing on the cake, but shouldn't be pivotal in the sense that your business doesn't survive the day you lose the subsidies. Because at the end of the day, what this pandemic has shown us is that subsidies are not sustainable. And they are probably the first thing that goes away at a tough time like we're in. A new dynamic has evolved because of this pandemic. I would maybe not new, but it's surfaced up to the priorities, is investment in technology. We've seen the companies that have invested in technology, e-commerce, remote selling, have managed to, survive a bit more than the ones that had the traditional walk-in customer to their stores.
Yes.
And we've seen companies that didn't have technology all of a sudden push technology to the top list of their priorities and start their investments and to focus more on e-commerce solutions, on customer deliveries, on service. At the end of the day, I think quality of service is always important too. People who run a lean and mean and efficient service to their customers, whether it's provision of goods or services, will continue to sustain and maintain more of their customer base. Those who are mediocre or less will be the first losers to lose their customer database, who will migrate to other businesses. A special concern in this pandemic is the smaller sector, the SME and the startups. Those are typically underfunded, less experienced, more vulnerable. My word of advice to them is it is opportune to look at merger and acquisitions. Instead of losing out, join forces with your competitors to build bigger companies and look at public funding. We still lag in this part of the world on access to public funding because of a mindset issue, not because of a shortage of liquidity in the market. But generally speaking, the general population who still believes they have to own their own companies, have their name on the letterhead and keep it within the family or within a close circle. And, my advice is that if you are short of liquidity, you're better off owning 20% of a thriving business than owning 100% of a diminishing business.
So true. And just thank you so much for that very comprehensive roundup in terms of looking at industry, looking at what people need to do. And again, I think with your great experience in the private sector, you're not just bringing, these words lightly. This is something that you've worked through, you've lived through, and some tremendous advice there, I think. And again, as you say, it's about the fundamentals and really watching the cash flow, being prudent. Talk to me a little bit more in general about what's going on now in Bahrain. I know there's a great diversification plan away from oil and gas, but oil and gas still absolutely essential, as we look at the energy transition. But we're seeing strong industrial growth as well. Talk to me about some of the strategies you've adopted in Bahrain.
I think it's very important when we talk about Bahrain to go back in history and not just take a snapshot of where we are today, because that will give you some kind of background on the general how this nation was built up. If we talk about diversification specifically, I think our diversification started more than 100 years ago. It was even before the discovery of oil. The first transformation, or the first milestone, is introducing formal education in Bahrain, which was established in 1919. So we realized that, in order to have a proper economy more than 100 years ago, we needed to have an educated nation. So we established formal education, and we started with that more than 100 years ago. Oil was discovered in the early 30s. We were the first to discover oil in the region. And that brought about a whole new dimension of diversification, because we suddenly went from a very small economy depending on cross trade and fishing and pearling to industry. And we jumped right into it. In the 50s, we were the first to set up an airline. So we started getting into aviation. This was another milestone. Why is aviation important? Because it is connectivity, and connecting us to the world, especially being an island, it is important. In the 70s, we diversified into the banking sector. And that again is important, because now you have an educated workforce, you have a well-connected country, and you have access to finance through the banking system. That followed up with insurance in the 80s. The insurance sector moved to Bahrain. And we saw the birth of Islamic banking and Islamic insurance, new products, new diversification. In the early part of this century, we also diversified further by deregulating telecoms, and Bahrain today enjoys one of the best networks of connectivity around the world, one of the highest numbers of internet and mobile penetration to the population. That again helps in setting up your business. So diversification is not a new topic for Bahrain. It's been there more than 100 years, and it will continue to do so. If we talk about where we are today, oil is the largest component of our economy, but it is only 22%. So it is not by far the largest. So we are catching up on it. You know, the financial sector is a close second at about 18 to 20%. Manufacturing is also not far away at about 15 to 18%. So the gap to oil is narrowing because we are expanding the economy in different sectors. Where do we go from here? I think we're looking at new trends, Industry 4.0, cloud computing, fintech, digital economy, and these are all plans coming into Bahrain. That, of course, goes hand in hand with diversification in economic sectors, which we are looking at in tourism and logistics and manufacturing. But I think the trends are also changing, and we have to stay tuned with the times to keep ahead of the curve.
Indeed, you do, yes. And I know, every time I go to Bahrain, the area is developing a lot more, and it's looking great. And there's been tremendous development there. And, of course, there's some beautiful sites and some ancient sites to see in Bahrain. And one area I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is that also comes into your portfolio too, is tourism, because it is a big contributor as well. And it can be an even bigger contributor. Talk to me a little bit about what's happening in terms of travel and tourism and how you are bringing people back to Bahrain.
Well, I mean, it is no secret that the aviation and tourism sector are probably the hardest to hit sectors because of COVID. And a lot of it had to do with the decisions or with policies taken by countries outside of our control. For example, we took a decision not to close our airport throughout the pandemic. And as the chairman of Gulf Air, I'm very proud to say that we never stopped flying for a single day. But there were days where we couldn't fly because no airports were open around the world. So we didn't have places to fly to. I remember, prior to COVID, we used to have 160 flights a day. We dropped to our lowest to 4 flights a week. So it shows you the gap. But we kept the connectivity. We kept doing what we were meant to do. Where we go from here, I think it's very important for us today, before talking about tourism, is that we had to make sure of ensuring safety and health and safety of travelers, of people who work in the tourism industry or the airline industry. We did that. We managed to successfully do that. We are now very confident that we can receive tourists here. The health system is ready to handle it. The facilities have been prepped up and up to the WHO standards. The same with our aircrafts. So we are ready to receive tourists. What we should be is we should be agile at this time, because it's a changing dynamic every day. Every day we have countries opening up, closing down, imposing more restriction, putting red lists, green lists, amber lists, changing transit rules. So it is very, very dynamic business. We have to move, and we have to look for pockets around the world where we can go and where we can attract tourists to Bahrain. So we're doing that. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you we have a clear plan for the next year or 5 years. It's not like when we started in 2015 with our first publicly announced tourism strategy. It was, there was much more visibility. We had clear KPIs, and we managed to deliver double the contribution of tourism to our GDP in less than 4 years. Where we want to go from there, we want to continue this growth. We want to expand and diversify our pool. be more global than regional. Most of our tourists today are from within the GCC or the Middle East. We want to expand further into Europe, into Russia, India, China, North America, and further out. We are in the process of launching our strategy, tourism strategy 2.0. We were meant to do that in 2020, but I think it was the worst time to launch a tourism strategy. And I can tell you today, had we launched it in 2020, 90% of it at least would not be applicable in 2021. So we are looking for the right opportunity and the right timing to launch it. Hopefully we feel that will happen before the year. So we are confident that tourism is a growing sector in Bahrain. This is why it's one of the priority sectors on our diversification plan. And we are happy to say that even throughout the pandemic, we've seen continuous investment in the sector, in facilities and products. We've seen more routes being established to Bahrain, mainly by Gulf Air, but also by other airlines coming from other countries. So we feel that we're just around the corner from rebounding on this sector.
And indeed, if we look wider on that, and I think we look at the great opportunities in Bahrain, for sure. You have a beautiful location, you have great weather year round, and lots of attractive lots to come to Bahrain for, indeed. And hopefully we'll all get back there very, very soon. But we look, just before we close, on a wider scale when we look at trends in tourism and how actually tourism, how can we leverage it for economic recovery? Because it can be very important, and it's only when we miss it we realize its importance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we see is there has been a new trend developing around the world of domestic tourism. But unfortunately, Bahrain is not big enough to have a domestic tourism industry that can be sustainable for the sector. We've seen a huge surge, for example, in Saudi Arabia of domestic tourism, but then Saudi Arabia is bigger than France. So you have, and it's so varied in its topography and its climates and its product, so they can afford to do that. Bahrain, unfortunately, 700 square kilometers, there's not too much to do, and there is enough to do, but not enough to sustain the vibrant tourism sector we have here. So what are we doing? We are looking at new opportunities in tourism, and we're building up our product base to be ready to hit the ground running once this COVID thing settles down a bit. This is why we chose to invest, for example, in a new exhibition and conference center, because we're really gearing up and focusing on MICE business to be attracted to Bahrain. We have a project underway. It will be ready hopefully by this time next year, a huge and ambitious project of 149,000 square meter of exhibition space and 4,000 seated auditorium conference center. This will be a landmark in the region, and we built it on a global scale because we want to put Bahrain on the global map of MICE business. Another project we just announced is to have a state-of-the-art sports city, which also is close to the exhibition center. And the aim for that is not just to serve Bahrain, but to have it as an attraction point for all the world athletes to come and train, rehabilitate, improve their performance here in Bahrain, and to have sports as a major pillar, or sports activities and sports tourism as a main pillar in our tourism offering. We were the first to launch Formula One in the Middle East in 2004, and that has been a huge and impactful event for us in Bahrain. It's one of the largest we do in our annual calendar, plus the huge exposure we get globally because of it. So we want to build up on the successes we've had. We feel that MICE, sports and health tourism are the next future prospects to develop our tourism offering more.
So lots going on to keep you very busy. and indeed within your portfolio, industry, commerce, and tourism. I know you, and I know today you have a very busy schedule. So I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to be with us. And I really want to thank you for giving us a comprehensive outlook in terms of what's going on in Bahrain, and indeed adding some value, I think, to what could be going on elsewhere. So we look forward to seeing you hopefully in Bahrain. And I know those conferences are coming back in person, so that'll be very exciting. So hopefully we'll be able to fill those halls and fill the seats of that new Congress Center for you too. So once again, Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and inshallah we see you all soon in Bahrain. Have a nice day.
Thank you. And that was the Minister of Industry, Commerce and Tourism from Bahrain, His Excellency Zayed Alzayani. So once again, thank you so much. Stay with ABLF. We will be right back.